Hey guys, there's a new Team House merch store. You can come and check it out. The link is in the description. You can get Team House stickers, Team House patches, which are really cool and really well done, American made. Team House t-shirts, hoodies, mugs. Shout out to that one person that bought the Eyes On mug. Love you. Mouse pads, camelback, tote bag. I don't know why we have the tote bag. I'm not a big tote bag guy. If you are, all the more power to you. But yeah, we got a ton of cool stuff. Stickers, American made. Patches, American made. T-shirts are also American made, but I don't fulfill them. I'm actually going to be the one shipping you the patches and the stickers. They're very cool. Check it out. The teamhouse-shop.fourthwall.com. That's a crazy URL. We'll change that, but don't worry. The link is in the description. Take a look. And in the show notes if you're listening to us on audio. We really appreciate it. And thanks for the continued support. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Eyes On. We got the full crew here: Jason Lyons, Andy Milburn, Mick Mulroy, and myself. Pretty busy week, a lot of things going on, and not many things blowing up, I guess, that we could talk about, which I guess is a decent thing. I mean, there are still things blowing up, but the big news this week was probably the USAID and that agency getting essentially gutted or trying to be gutted. I think it speaks to, we were talking about in our group message, like U.S. soft power and stuff like that, where, someone's going to fill that gap. And yeah, I mean, let's kick it off. You guys fight over who wants to go first about this.
Like, you want me to start? So
go for it, Mick. Yeah.
Sure. So just not to give too much of a history lesson, but it's a bit relevant. It was created as a creature of the Cold War, 1961 by the Federal Assistance Act, which created the need for an entity like this. And then President Kennedy created USAID from an executive order. I'm only bringing that up because there's a lot of questions about, can you get rid of it by executive order? I don't know the answer, but that's, from my understanding, doing the research on the topic to be ready this week, that's how it was structured. So the importance of it is substantial. And I'll be the first, I'll lead with that. It is to enhance U.S. foreign policy. That's a question that we should come back to, and whether it has strayed from that. That's one of the reasons why many people wanted it to fall directly under the State Department and not be its own independent agency. The first part, which is enhancing U.S. Policy objectives. The second part is the humanitarian work that it does overseas. Full disclosure, obviously, I'm and my team is fully involved in that, so we see it in action. About 60% of their budget goes to critical food aid to people who are in need, and a substantial part goes to medical assistance, to include trying to seriously reduced transmittable diseases, which of course can affect everybody. And I think as Americans, we should all be proud of the work that they have done in that regard. We're about 40% of the foreign aid, U.S. taxpayers around the world. We could have another discussion on the need for other countries to step up in that regard, but we should be proud of that. And then the other part is the developmental part. And I think we can get into some of the issues there. Some of the things they fund, to be frank, to me, we should never be funding. But some of it on the developmental side is very important, because countries that once received developmental aid are now key trading partners with the United States. So it isn't just, all give, no benefit. It is to the U.S. Beneficial. But I think some of the issues that have really harmed the reputation of USAID, and seeing what's happening right now, are that they haven't always been consistent with U.S. foreign policy, and some of the things they fund seem to be not beneficial to the United States. And I think we could solve those issues by addressing that rather than dismantling the organization, which is very important. Foreign aid, only 1% of the budget, 1%. And that includes all of the State Department and USAID. And then lastly, before I stop my diatribe here. The people of USAID, as I'm sure you guys, Jay, Andy, have seen them all over the world, conflict zones, risking their lives, out on patrol. They don't get near the recognition that say us vets do for doing what they do, and they hang it out there and they risk it all. And this is no way to treat those folks. There's a lot of real issues that need to be addressed, and I think it's good that they are being addressed. But remember, these folks are Americans working for the government, doing great work around the world for America. So I would just hope that we don't turn criticism of what the leadership has decided to do in some circumstances into turning them into something they're not, which is this idea that they're completely off the reservation. They're doing great work and they're risking their lives every day. So I would hope that we keep that in mind in any of the debates going forward on this agency.
Yeah, USAID is a tremendous enabler for the military, especially in the soft side, but the military in general, going all the way back to Vietnam. The agency, right, to some extent, certainly the Marine Corps' Civil Action Program, both involved tying in closely with USAID officials. And the guys in the field who stayed there longer than the U.S. military did. They'd be out there for 2 to 3 years, spoke fluent Vietnamese, and then in our own experience, remember it's not that long ago the provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan, which were heavily supported by USAID, and and even if you don't care about things like the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands actually of lives that they've saved, most of them children, from epidemics like malaria in Africa or indeed HIV. I agree with you. Make a good 75% of what the organization does is solid work in line with U.S. foreign policy. And if it has strayed in the area of development, well, fire the guy in charge. That's how you deal with the unit. If 7th Marines is doing bad things, you don't dismantle the whole regiment and send the Marines elsewhere, although many of them would love to be out of 29 Palms. You've the boss. It all stems from leadership. That's such a basic tenet. But I think, it's politics. It's about sending a very loud message via the media. And I watched Fox News go over and over these stories about development projects gone awry, but none of this other background or context, not a single story about it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that both of you just said. And for me personally, it's the human element of it, both those lives saved and the fact that, like Mick touched on, these people have families, even if they're overseas, they have families back home. And to say that you're okay with just gutting, these people's jobs and saying, oh, well, go find something else, especially for me, and this is kind of a rant for me, people who have never worked in the government at all, or even with the government, whatever it is they do, God bless you, your job, whatever that is. But not that you shouldn't have an opinion on it, but that's an opinion. I don't care what, unless you're going to show me numbers and you're going to say, well, when I worked at USAID, I saw this, and I do agree that there's probably bloat that needs to be cut, and there are probably programs that need to be refined. And again, like Andy said, get rid of the people who are in charge of those things if they're wrong, but leave the little folks alone. And for anyone who's okay with decimating these people's lives, well, I question your patriotism, if we're going to get prickly about it. Sorry.
Yeah, and if we're if we're going by the premise that there's bloat and waste in like probably every agency that the U.S. government or any government runs, right? Like, it's hard to like not delve into domestic politics with this, because Congress controls the budget, right? So if there is an issue, they want to cut certain things, negotiate it in Congress, do it the lawful way, how it's always been done, And, that's that. Like going in and just with a chop saw and sending out 2 million emails. This is a broader conversation to like all federal employees. I think it's great. I think it's insane. I think it makes no sense. It's leaving us exposed. There's someone's going to fill that vacuum, right? And it's going to be China. So if we have if we're really seeing China as an actual threat in the next century, how is 1% cutting out completely 1% of the budget that helps strengthen our soft power and put us where we need to be around the world? How is that beneficial? Like, I mean, I'm looking for somebody to explain it to me. I get it. Maybe there's waste for sure. Chop that stuff. I get it. Like, but it just really feels like a ready, fire, aim kind of thing rather than like actual thoughtfulness, logic going into making decisions that would benefit U.S. taxpayers and people around the world. I don't know. Call me nuts.
I think you hit on a really important point that we hadn't touched on yet is just how our adversaries are going to react to this, right? So, I mean, the reason why China has its Belt and Road Initiative isn't because it's a giant benevolent country that's just looking to do good in the world, right? They try to bed themselves in these developing countries and then take all our resources. That's my commentary on it. And they're looking at this idea that we would just dismantle the U.S. Entity that does this. Again, very small part of the budget, and they're just going to fill the gap. So, and that's why then Secretary Rubio was so pro USAID for his whole career, because he looks at it as soft power, yes, but certainly a way to compete outside of the sphere of conflict with our adversaries. So they're absolutely going to take advantage of the fact that we're not where we used to be, and they are, and they're just going to be there. We're the only ones left on the field, so to speak. So yeah, that is a big factor in this. And I think a lot of senators understand both sides of the aisle, and they'll be asking a lot of those questions here next week.
Do you remember when we spoke about a few weeks back about like a little bit of a rift inside the administration with the China hawks being Rubio and others against like the business folks, Elon Musk and those guys? It seems to me that the business folks won, or at least have a little bit more sway in the administration. I feel like Rubio's kind of the odd man out a little bit. At least it's what it seems like from my interpretation.
I think you could include Mike Waltz into the traditional national security perspective of the Republican Party, along with Rubio. So there's others there. There's certainly others in the Pentagon. I don't even know what Secretary Hegseth's view of that is, but certainly under him, Colby, for example, was one of the biggest China hawks in D.C., and now he's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. He's supposed to set the policy of the Defense Department. He was a very fervent anti-China hawk, and I assume he still is. You don't just change. So I think you're right. There's going to be a tension inside the party, particularly with Elon, which I don't know how long you're allowed to be a special government employee, or I don't know what the situation is with that.
While you're CEO of 5 other like massive companies, like
that all do business with the U.S. government, which is another issue. But I think there is hawks, the traditional hawks inside of the Trump administration.
Yeah, that's that's a good point. I think hopefully cooler heads get it holds sway here. And that's a great point about National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. I mean, he has everything I've seen from him. I mean, he's got a balanced and a very realistic view when it comes to foreign policy, and particularly towards China, and will recognize the fact that undermining our own soft power is shooting ourselves in the head. However well it seems to play in the short term to domestic politics. And it's probably wise for any politician to understand that public discourse in this country is largely fueled by ignorance, just lack of education, general education, lack of interest, and collective ADHD. So, but and wise politicians and statesmen understand that, and I mean, going all the way back, I mean, who knew that we would now be looking back at someone like, say, Nixon, okay, but Nixon and Kissinger, um, who had been vilified and rightly in cases, for the conduct of the Vietnam War, blah, 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 delaying. But remember, they also had some inspired moves when it came to foreign policy. My point is that reaching out to China at the time when they reached out to China would not have sold well to the American public, right? But they recognized that it was something that it was probably in the long-term interest of the United States. And it was, for the next 2 decades. It was the right thing to do, regardless of how it played to domestic politics.
True. To try to get the Sino-Soviet split, right? I mean, that was the primary
exactly.
reason. Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't about befriending the Chinese or thinking that they were benevolent, but yeah,
Right.
it was all about that. And ultimately, arguably, that led, 20 something 27 years later to the demise of the Soviet Union, or contributed to it.
Yeah, it did contribute. I think that's a fair statement.
Any final thoughts about USAID? I can't really see it being held up in courts. I'm gonna be honest. I mean, I hope not anyway, because like that would mean separation of powers are out the window, right?
Yeah,
So
but the problem with that though, D, is, and yeah, I'm a great believer in separation of powers, but in order for them to work, they have to act with alacrity, and courts are not positioned to act quickly necessarily. So normally, in the near term, you're looking at Congress. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Ultimately, that is the sanction. We'll see.
Well,
What's up?
I hope cooler heads prevail. That a lot of the, not that Democrats shouldn't also do it, but certainly the Republicans on the Senate Foreign Relations committees and House go talk about like why this is important and how they can address the issues that they have issues with without dismantling the very entity that we're just going to recreate, right? To do that. And yes, I think, and I've been on many country teams, which are the interagency teams at embassies, where the State Department were one of the most adamant about U.S. aid falling under state. Maybe it was a parochial belief, but I think it also makes more sense that the leader of the U.S. foreign policy and diplomatic should actually include direct tasking of U.S. aid. So yes, I think most would agree with that, including on both sides of the aisle, or many. And then the question is, if we don't want to fund that, that doesn't mean we stop doing all of that, right? Like, so helping the world not be so unstabilized, because we're a moral country, and I think we should be proud of that. We are primarily the ones that are going around the world helping people in dire need. And that's important for itself, but it's also important because if the people that live there can't stay there, they leave, and it destabilizes other countries. So it's in the benefit of everybody to do that. That's 60% of their budget. So the other 40% is really coming down to these developmental issues, and a lot of them are really important too. But just focus on the ones you don't like. Don't destroy the U.S. reputation, and potentially. And I'm not one to be hyperbolic, but a lot of people are going to die if we don't keep supporting this. I mean, there's people on the verge of starvation now, for example, in Sudan, which doesn't get enough attention in my opinion. If we just cut off our efforts, it's not just the aid itself. And by the way, $2 billion a year goes into the farming states to buy food to send to places like Sudan. It benefits the American people. So they're going to have to hear from their Iowa contingencies here really quick, because they're going to lose a lot of money because of this, right? So that part I don't think is controversial. It benefits the United States, and it saves lives around the world, which I think we should all support.
yeah, you think that's like an easy, like, oh, it saves lives. Like, oh yeah, I'm for that, right? You would assume that that's the the snap reaction by most people. Can you let me know some of the development programs that are like on the fence in terms of like maybe they don't make sense, maybe they're boondoggles or whatever, you know?
So there's a list. I don't want to repeat them because I can't tell now which ones are true or not.
All the condoms in Gaza
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. There's a lot. And I've seen congresspersons read them in Congress, so I assume they're reading. And some of them, I think everybody on this is like, what? Why are we funding that?
Sure.
Right? So I'm not saying that there isn't, and you guys have already said it, you particularly, D, there's stuff that is funded by a lot of different agencies around the government that are head scratchers.
Right.
So I'm all about going through that and cutting them because we could take that money and spend it on something more worthwhile to the American people. So I'm not defending all of it, and I don't think anybody is, to be honest. But I'm just defending the part of it that's at the core, the whole reason why it was created back in the early 60s. It's still relevant today. It's as relevant as it was back then. And I think we just need to make it more effective and more in line with what the American people expect.
Yeah, I think that's a totally logical and reasonable way if that everyone, you know, anyone who has the purse string should be doing that, like living by that standard. Like I can't see this being why this has to be such a wedge issue and a political issue. It's because of Elon Musk. Let's not get it twisted here, okay? Like, I'm gonna say it, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care at all. So, and what's going on with him is, I'd be worried if I work in any federal agency or department, right? Like, you just got like basically walking papers, the similar ones that they got at Twitter 2 years ago. Meanwhile, Twitter's not even profitable yet. Like, so let's not acting like he's doing stuff that makes sense. It doesn't. And you know, they did it with the CIA. They sent this, you know, what if half the CIA was like, you know what, I'll take my walking papers, go to the private sector, make 3 times as much money as I make in the CIA, and the CIA's gutted. When 40%, or is it 60 or 40% of the CIA's budget goes towards intel on China, right? Our next greatest near peer threat. So I don't know. It's too much to me, and I'm just a dummy. It's too much like ready, fire, aim, like not even giving a shit about the lives it affects, the national security it affects. They shot over a list of the email names of the CIA folks that had signed up over the last 2 years over unsecured emails. Like, what are we doing here? Like, this isn't like just a startup. Like, there's needs. Yeah, they sent over a list of the names of the CIA folks who had just been hired over the last 2 years because they're more likely to get fired, I guess. They're easier to get rid of over unsecured emails. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're in a probation period, so it is easier to terminate them. The issue, of course, we'll start with the email and go to the broader issue. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't do that on a secured email. It doesn't make sense whatsoever. They tried to obscure it by not including the last name, but some people have very distinguishable first names. Let's face it. We're not all John Smith, right? So that's a problem, big problem. It's going to be a big problem for them to deploy, especially if they do have these certain first names that are very easily identifiable, so unique. The bigger issue, and I'm biased, and you know, me and Jason were both in the agency, so I'll start with that. First of all, the agency is very small. The exact number is classified, so I don't even really know it, but I won't guess. But I can say, because we used to say this to a lot of congressional delegations, is at one time there was a base in Afghanistan that had more military members than the CIA had people.
Oh, wow.
Period. All of it. Okay. So, you know, if this is some kind of cost savings, then you've definitely gone to the wrong place when it comes to personnel. In addition to that, especially on the clandestine side, it costs an extraordinary amount to train a person. I mean, they told us it's more than a fighter pilot. The training, you know, for, you know, PMOO, for example, could take over 2 years. And then you're going to get language before you ever actually. So we're getting rid of, and PMOs were very small almost, but the clandestine side, which is much broader than my little tribe, it costs a lot of money just to get them before they walk out the door to do their first job, right? It's a lot of training. It's repetitive. Then there's language. There's all sorts of things that they have to go through before they're actually hitting the streets doing the clandestine job, which is dangerous, very important. And there's no decent country in the world that ever didn't have an intelligence, right? I don't care. It's like you can go back to we had raiding parties as primitive man, and probably the second thing they thought of is let's go collect information on the other group, right? So I mean, this is a core function of any society. We do it better than anybody in the world with a budget that's actually pretty reasonable. So I would hope that they, and I know that a lot of the career national security folks in the administration are going to stand up about this. We don't want them to take that. We'll have to replace them. It'll cost more, and it will take years to get to the point if we get a lot of takeouts of this buyout. So I hope that they don't, and it's in the interest by far of the U.S. people that they don't. Sorry, box.
Yeah. Sorry to the Elon Musk fans out there, but I'm gonna call it like the guy's a joke. Like, he shouldn't be anywhere near the administration at all. Forget the fact that he's a CEO of like 4 or 5 companies that gets government contracts, and it's just insane conflict of interest. That's for sure. And I don't want to get anybody worked up because it's right or left thing. But it's wild. And anybody who's like sort of logical and reasonable sees that and understands that. Because there's things you can cut. Yeah, there's a $4 trillion budget, right? Or whatever the trillions of dollars our budgets. Like, we can cut stuff 100%. When the next budget comes up, go in there and figure it out. Like, do your job as a Congress. And negotiate it, debate it, do whatever you need to do, what you get paid for, and take care of business. I mean, the Defense Department can't pass an audit. The Marines can, but the entire Defense Department can't, right? That's an issue. I'm not saying cut the Defense Department by half. I would never say that because we have real threats out there. But you could find stuff to cut. You don't need 17 different like submarine development programs, right? Maybe chop that down to 4. Like, there's probably ways you could line item it and find things to cut. So I don't know. Sorry if I'm a pinko commie.
Well, and sorry to add to that, along with what you're saying, making these cuts, don't just send people to the chopping block. Fold them into other areas. They have skills that can be used. Don't just, hey, you have a week to decide the rest of your life, your fate. Fold them into other areas. That's, this, willy-nilly thing that we're doing here is just, it's dangerous, in my opinion.
I think it makes sense as a strategy if you're a startup or a business owner that just like you're whatever Bain Capital is, like a type of like a private equity company that goes in, chops up a company and makes money off that. I don't technically agree with that too, but it makes more sense to do that in the private sector than it would governmental stuff. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just looking at like some logic. Just 1 + 1 = 2. It just doesn't make sense.
Or even if you're going to do it in the federal government, do it stretched out strategically over time period, not just you have a week, or we're just going to gut this thing whether you like it or not. That just doesn't make any sense.
And it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, and it might sound to be disappointed if I didn't bring up the whole issue of massive national debt. He tracks it a lot. We do. What's 34 trillion? I think it's right now. And I saw a stat the other day that by 2050, that 50% of our budget will go to paying interest. Yeah. So it's a real issue. I mean, I'm not an economist, but you don't have to be an economist to see that. So, but there has to be, like you guys just said, there has to be a comprehensive plan, right? Because even the cuts they're talking about now aren't going to do much to it. So, like, how are we going to actually increase revenues, cut spending? I mean, how are we going to do that? Most politicians don't care much beyond their term, either side. So if there isn't some like coming together of the folks that are making these decisions, coming up with a plan that will suck for some people, whether you're paying higher taxes or tariffs or like whatever it is, but we have to come up with a plan, because it just seems like where we're headed is just like we just ignored it. Like we're just not even talking about it and then hoping that it won't come to fruition, but it seems like it will. I'll tell one short anecdote. When I was at the Pentagon, the Secretary Mattis had us go to an offsite with all his folks. We had one, and I'll leave the person out, but it was a significant political figure that was there answering all sorts of questions, and most of them are obviously very helpful. But he got one question on the deficit, or the debt, rather. And his answer was Camp Pendleton. And we're like, what? And he like, what about Camp Pendleton? He goes, we're going to sell Camp Pendleton. Like,
to
really?
who?
People like Camp Pendleton. I mean,
The developers. Yeah.
Developers, right? And so, and then of course, the second question after he said that is, where are you going to put the First Marine Division, right? So, I mean, I mean, a lot of us left out of that going, well, I was concerned about the debt. Now I'm super concerned about it. Like it's that,
Yeah.
that's the plan. Like literally, this person was a substantial, and I don't know if he was being tongue in cheek, but it was like, is the plan to deal with the debt to sell off federal lands? I don't know. But I've never heard that articulated by anybody else. But I would, I know this isn't what this show is about, but we're going to have to deal with it because it is a security issue too, a national security issue to have this incredible debt hanging over all of us.
If you want to really go after it, and as far as the DoD budget, you go after the acquisition programs. I mean, you don't tinker around the margins with manpower, trying to persuade a handful of people to retire early. You go after the big acquisition programs, because if you want to talk about wastage and pork, and that is where it occurs.
Right.
And everyone knows it, but no one wants to go after them because there are too many people with vested interests. I mean, it is, I know it's a cliche, but the military industrial complex, that is the heart of the military industrial complex. And I haven't heard any talk from this administration about really going after that. And I haven't seen any action either. And that, I would welcome that. I mean, our whole acquisition program needs to be retooled. It is hopelessly slow, inefficient. By the time we field pieces of gear, everything from the 782 gear to aircraft carriers, they're largely obsolete. And by the way, aircraft carriers are obsolete. And if you want to save $10 billion a pop, then you do away with the modernization programs and the building programs. But I won't get into that. But my point is, all of this is for show. What we're saying for show. If you want to really go, it's cut down on the budget, DoD. That's what you do.
Well, I remember the F-35 program, which obviously it brought out like a really good plane, and they're out there, and we sold them to our allies and stuff like that. But parts for that plane were built or manufactured in like 45 states because they wanted it to be a job program. Mm-hmm. And I get that. I love jobs for a lot of states, but there's definitely more efficient ways of doing things, right? And yeah, I mean, unlimited money into Congress is not the way to keep things efficient, right? Like that's always going to...
It's pork barrel politics, right?
Right.
And it ties... And the other vested interests, of course, are the giant defense companies. So there's only half a dozen of them. And they get contracts again and again and again to produce hardware, which, as I've said, is largely obsolete. I'm not talking about the F-35, I mean, that's an extraordinary aircraft, but anyone familiar with acquisition and more familiar than I am, can trot out a long list of failed projects that have cost the government billions of dollars, and that's no exaggeration in aggregate.
Yeah. And you said,
but no one goes after it because, as you pointed out, there's tremendous congressional buy-in to regardless of which side of the aisle you fall, you're going to have, if you have constituents who are making money out of one of these acquisition programs, constituent companies, then you're going to fight tooth and nail to prevent that program from being scrapped.
Right. Or you're going to get primaried, right? Like you'll get booted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we should just fix the entire government, us four right here. I'm ready when you guys are to get going on this.
I'll do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the hell's gonna happen.
Certainly, I mean, there's certainly fat. I mean, we've talked about that. And I've got to say, I mean, there's part of me that just looks at the Pentagon, 28,000 people. We should be solving everything in the world, but I mean, it's a major city. I mean, yes, we definitely have we definitely have a tremendous layer of fat when it comes even to DoD in manpower is my guess, but that's all it is on my part. It's kind of my guess. Because I don't, I've never done the analytics. But even then, you're not going to save. That's not what, as I said, where you're going to save most money.
Right.
And the other area where DoD spends most of its money is on uh, benefits, right? I mean, I hate to say this, but retirement, huge amount because as people get older, you've got and then remember we had to military retire a lot of people during not Vietnam, during Afghanistan and Iraq, disability payments, all of that takes up an enormous amount of the defense budget. Are you going to go after that? No, I would hope not.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
it's interesting because it, like Mick had alluded to it too. It's like all kind of interlocked, right? Like even if we got rid of USAID, which helps domestic farmers, right, bring food to different countries that need it. Like you said, like if we fix the healthcare system, it'd probably be a lot cheaper for folks in America, whether they're military or not, to like it would ease the burden on like certain agencies and be able to trim fat if healthcare was like more streamlined, like every other developed country in the world.
Yeah, I mean, Secretary Mattis said, I think when he was general, but that if you're going to cut USAID, you're going to have to give him some money to buy more bullets, right? So this is also in a lot of these places, and I saw one example that I think at first most people would say, it seems like we shouldn't be spending, but we were spending money on, I guess, a version, if not Sesame Street, teaching kids in Iraq and Syria.
Mm-hmm.
At first you're like, wow, should we be paying it? And then when they say, well, do you want Big Bird teaching these kids, or do you want ISIS?
Them in
right?
madrasas, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. It doesn't cost that much. And obviously we want kids to be educated, and we sure to hell don't want them indoctrinated into the theology or the depravity of ISIS, right? So when you step back and actually look at it, it's pennies on the budget. And it does. So those are one of those things that they should be a full review, not just a snippet on, social media where people just go, I don't know why we spend that. It needs to actually be thought out and explained. And if they can't explain it, then it needs to be cut. Right. So
Sure.
It's a two-way street, but it's not as easy as it might appear from a social media post.
Yeah. And 280 characters, right? Yeah. A budget, all right. I don't feel good about this conversation, but so are we gonna buy a eyes on timeshare in Gaza soon? What are we doing? Because the next bit of news was President Trump came out the other day in a joint press conference with Bibi Netanyahu, talking about relocating Gazans, Palestinians from Gaza to the surrounding areas, Egypt, Jordan, and the U.S. taking over Gaza and redeveloping it, which is like a new wrinkle in this roller coaster.
Sure.
Mick,
so I'll start with where it started, then where it went, and potentially try to put both sides, if there is both sides. One, I think it surprised even the White House. So, and I think it's enough reporting that we can know that's true. And this certainly Defense Department, and who would not want to sign up for another war in the Middle East, and State Department. So the issues with it, you laid it out. I think one, it's completely impractical, right? There's too many people that aren't going to just leave their homeland. So it would be an extraordinarily difficult military problem, well armed, well entrenched, it probably would require the U.S. military, and that's completely against the stated policy of trying to pull ourselves out of conflicts, not going into conflicts that aren't even our conflicts. So that's one. Two, it's likely, and I'm not an international legal scholar, but unlawful. You can't forcibly displace people from their homeland, period. It's not a thing. Just because you want to then occupy and potentially benefit from their terrain or territory. So that's another downside. The third downside is everybody that would be required to do this is against it. Right. So the two countries where these people could potentially be forcibly relocated are Egypt and Jordan, and they're 100% opposed. They would think it would completely destabilize their country, and they don't have the infrastructure for it. And then the countries that we really need to come in and help reconstruct Gaza, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, are also completely opposed to it. So it seems like a non-starter from the get-go. And that's why even the White House rolled back. He didn't mean permanent. He meant temporary, even though he said permanent, like the word permanent. It's been walked back substantially. I think we're kind of where we were before the press conference. I'm sure that there's certain elements of Netanyahu's coalition that'll just continuously go back to the press conference because they want this to happen. But I don't think we're there. If there is, an upside, to be as fair as I can, some people are saying it's a negotiation tactic, just on the wall, just kind of a very out there idea. And then when everybody's opposed to it, like they are, turn to them and say, what's your idea? So I do hope that, some of these countries that are very comfortable sitting on the sidelines and critiquing our ideas, some of them have been good for the last 40 years, do start coming more involved in, well, what's the solution? So that might be very rosy way of looking at it, but that's certainly what some of them are saying. And if it does get more countries to the table to actually present ideas and ways to implement those ideas, I hope that does happen. But this, I think, is a non-starter for us.
I think, to Mick's point about Egypt and Jordan, again, second and third stage effects. In Jordan, just over half the population is Palestinian. And during this since Gaza kicked off back in October of last year, the Jordanian government has been hanging on by its fingernails. And the Muslim Brotherhood gained significant traction for the first time in the Jordanian parliament in the last elections. So, mass displacement of Gazans into Jordan would undoubtedly have a catastrophic effect on one of the most benevolent democracies in the Middle East and a staunch ally of the United States. And now Egypt has its own concerns with the Muslim Brotherhood, as we well know. And Egypt said that, hey, the peace treaty with Israel is off if this happens. And so you can see, Israel may scoff at that right now, but that's going to have significant ramifications for Israeli security too, even if you don't care about anything else. Israel says all bets are off and lets that border be porous, especially, with all the trouble that's been bubbling away in the Sinai. That's endless trouble for Israel. And unlike Gaza, where Israel could contain all these problems, now you've got two massive borders, and countries with just not enough border guards to be able to stop the Palestinian militants from going back and forth and attacking Israel. So Netanyahu chortling away about this again just shows that he's a political operative, and he sees again another lifeline, but this isn't good for his country either, and it's disastrous for the Middle East. And by the way, Russia and China are also laughing because, let's be honest, the United States is looking not very smart right now. And then they're poised in the wings, ready to take advantage of that yet again. It's just bad, it's just bad news across the board.
Yeah. And I mean, it looked like Netanyahu was pretty surprised by it as well, right? Because I'm sure if you ask his right of his coalition, they want to come back into Gaza and resettle it, right? Like they probably don't make it a secret that that's what they want.
Well, yeah, Netanyahu's the right wing in Israel has for a long time said that Jordan should, that the Palestinians have a home in Jordan. But there's all, kinds of things wrong with that. I mean, even if you don't care about the ethical part of this of simply transplanting people from there from one place to another, which may seem like a great idea uh, to again many Americans until, for instance, you talk about taking Brooklyn, and no, that's a bad example because I think most people there would just love to move anywhere in the United States. I mean, any other like normal part of the United States and moving place to another forcibly.
It's probably fair.
Um, yeah, I mean it's, but the point with the right wing in Israel is that they really can't see they, to say uh, they lack vision is an understatement. I mean, all they're thinking about is a return to Judea and Samaria, and this is our homeland, blah blah blah. But their hold on that homeland is going to grow increasingly fragile if they pursue these policies.
Yeah.
And you can't appeal to their ethics because they don't have them. They really do feel as though the Palestinians are Untermensch. They're not, that they're people who are not worthy of consideration. Um, so you have to appeal to the fact that they're going to undermine their own security. I mean, you remember when we had an episode here with an former Israeli politician, and that appeal just kept falling flat. It was like, look, we know you don't care about the ethical part of this argument, but do you understand that by simply plowing on as though these are not human beings and they don't deserve anything, or that in the end you can't ever attain what you want to attain for your people?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a secure homeland.
Yeah. Very well said. I mean, that's it. Have we solved it? Have we figured everything out? I feel like we haven't.
Now,
But
right? Yeah, abolish the Pentagon, scrap the aircraft carrier, building program.
well, we see now what Andy's he's anti-aircraft.
Yeah, he's been from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think anyone with a brain is against these big platforms.
Well, they're definitely rethinking the aircraft carrier.
I mean, they're not cheap. They're $13 billion a pop.
And how much is a missile that can take it out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was in, I'm digressing a little bit here, and when we divested of tanks in the Marine Corps, it was a hugely emotional issue. And actually, I didn't 100% agree with it. I think if you need, you need certain weapon systems, but the problem is, I think we need and you certainly need a rolling gun platform, wherever you're going to use infantry. And to scrap them, I thought was premature because until we can have unmanned tanks, that is the solution. I'm not
which is coming.
Yeah, or unmanned aircraft carriers that fly drones,
Yep.
and multiple ones at vastly reduced cost. But once you start having to pay for the care and feeding and protection of human beings in any platform, then the price starts shooting up.
Exactly. But tank's a good example of that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. I mean, you could make multiple little M1A1 models, with similar capability gun platform, right?
Yep.
But unmanned.
Much lighter, much cheaper.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And going back to the guy that came back, I was trying to think what I was going to say. Like Saudi Arabia put out a statement at like 5 a.m. their time after that. So they were like, yeah, we're not down with this. We want Palestine to have their own state.
Yeah.
dropping a statement like that at 5 a.m. local time is, means like, yeah, this is serious for us. We're not waiting until we wake up and have our, our tea.
Yeah, that's another aspect of the D.
They've been absolutely consistent with that throughout.
Yep. And one of the big initiatives for this administration when it comes to the Middle East is this grand bargain, right? Expanding the Abraham Accords, which is Saudi Arabia, Israel coming into some kind of agreement. And this took us well down the path of the other direction. So that's another reason why they walked it back, I think, substantially.
Yeah. Anything else, boys? This was great. Sorry if anyone's upset.
I'm not.
Talked a little smack about Elon Musk. Sorry.
I'm totally into space exploration, so I
so am I.
Focus on that.
Listen, I think Tesla's done some great stuff in terms of like
SpaceX has done great things.
Yeah, I think he's done some great things for sure, but he's gone off the deep end.
Yeah, I think he stuck his toe into the wrong pool of water here.
He's just been too long at the party, man. You can't be the richest guy alive and like be a normal person your whole life. Something's gonna give. It's like, look at Gaddafi. Look at like these people who are in power for 30 years. They're just too long at the party, and they got to go home. Guys, do me a favor. Check everybody's links out in the description. Mick Mulroy, Lobo, Fogbo, doing great stuff, humanitarian stuff.
You just muted yourself, man.
Oh, that's what happens when we talk about Elon.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's still gone.
Sign it.
Okay. Well, we are signing off here. Check out Longbow Fogbow. Please check out my book. I get at least a dime every time one is bought anywhere in the world. And we will see you next week. And hopefully we'll have D back at that time. I think he's still running the show, so only he can enter, right?
Oh, sorry.
Say bye, D.
All right, guys.